and welcome to episode 1 of my podcast, Knitting with knitboop. My name is Yura. I can be more commonly found across the internet and Instagram as knitboop, and I'm a knitter, knitwear designer, spinner, crocheter, dyer, and general love of all things crafty, living in the Midwest. If this is your first time joining me, which it is, considering this is episode 1, then welcome, and I'm really glad that you're here with me today. Just a quick word up front that I do try to keep this a family-friendly podcast, but I don't shy away from talking about the more political issues that might be affecting our crafting community as a whole. If you follow me over on Instagram, you'll already know that that's the case, and I'm very passionate about talking about these topics. But if you're looking for, something that's more, podcast just about crafting, then this probably isn't going to be the podcast for you. But for those of you who, have decided to stick around nonetheless, then thank you and welcome. Just a couple of admin notes. I'm going to include links to everything I talk about in the show notes in the description box down below. I'm still trying to feel out the format for this podcast, so pardon the dust, so to speak. I haven't really fully decided if I'm going to be including show notes on my Instagram page as well, but rest assured I'm going to try to include everything I talk about in the description box of the YouTube video at least. Now that all these sort of admin notes are out of the way, I'm going to talk a little bit about myself, although it does feel a little narcissistic to do that. But I figured it's nice for the viewers to know who I am and why they should watch my podcast. As I've already said, my name is Yura, but my online persona identity username is knitboop. I started crafting when I was, like most people, when they were really young. My mom actually taught me how to crochet at first, based on some of the things she learned in home ec classes. And I learned how to crochet little doilies and things like that. But, when you're a 10-year-old child, you don't really have a whole lot of need for doilies. So my interest in crafting sort of petered off after that. That was all until about 5 years ago when I started knitting. And the story of how I started knitting is actually one of my favorite stories to tell. So at that time, my boyfriend at the time, who is now my partner, he told me about how a lot of his friends from work and coworkers were going on this knitting road trip, which, I had never heard about before. But he was like, you should go with them. It'll be a lot of fun. And I was like, sure, why not? So I was sort of bundled into this car with a bunch of people I had never met before. And we went on this 10-hour road trip all around the state of Indiana, visiting all of these yarn stores and, for me, at least familiarizing myself with the knitting possibilities that are out there. And it was in the backseat of that car, and I remember this very vividly still because it was summer in Indiana and we were stuck in traffic and it was unbearably hot. But it was in the backseat that I learned how to knit for the first time. And I remember, being very excited. I had purchased this pair of circular needles, which I didn't even know were a thing before. And I was casting on a hat with the help of one of the people there who's, to this day, one of my closest crafting friends. And obviously the hat was far from perfect. It was way too small. It had a whole bunch of holes in it. And it was summer in Indiana, so I couldn't even wear it for several months. I don't think I ever actually wore it in any capacity. But for some reason, that really sparked my crafting mojo, and I kind of became addicted to knitting in many ways. And it has helped me through some really hard times, which is why I'm a big advocate of craft as therapy. And I do think, crafting does have a lot of healing benefits to it. I started getting a little more serious about my knitting, I say serious, about a year and a half ago. So for a little bit more context, I'm currently a PhD student doing my PhD in informatics, and my research interests are actually in online communities, specifically online crafting communities. So I was kind of keeping an eye on the Instagram crafting community, particularly around January of 2019, when all of these discussions surrounding racism, race, privilege in the crafting spaces started emerging. And I was keeping a very close eye on things, collecting publicly available data and just keeping an eye on trends in how these topics were being handled. And because I was so familiar with the data, I felt like I really had something meaningful to contribute to the discussion. And so I started using my Instagram page a lot more actively, participating in the discussions about racism and about my own experiences as a person of color living in Indiana, which is a very white conservative state. And so I found that, people were responding to the things I had to say, and they were responding in a way that made it feel like what I had to say was valuable and meaningful, and that was really empowering. And then, of course, all of this sort of came to a head in the summer of last year when I kind of, I facetiously proposed this idea of having an online craft-along for queer people who found it very difficult to go to in-person Pride events. Obviously, this was around Pride. And this was from my own experiences. I had quite recently, come out as bi and queer, and I was really starting to sort of embrace that part of my identity. But because I get very overstimulated and overwhelmed in loud outdoor spaces with a lot of people, I really didn't feel comfortable going to Pride. I did get a couple of invitations from friends to go to Pride with them after I came out, but I never felt like that was really my thing. And so I wanted a version of Pride where I could, celebrate my queerness and the queerness of those around me in a space where we might be a little more comfortable, like online. And that post sort of blew up. I was not expecting it to, but then, we had our first Quiet Queers craft along. And the outpouring of support from makers, designers, people who donated prizes, people who were participating, that was just really mind-blowing. And if you follow me on Instagram, you'll know that, we're doing Quiet Queers Craft Along again this year. We delayed it a little bit in respect to the Black Lives Matter movement that I felt should have taken precedence over celebrating queer pride. But the craft along is happening now. I'm going to talk a little bit more about it later, but those are sort of the things that, triggered me to become a little more active in the crafting community. And then, of course, last year I started designing my own knitwear patterns. It started off with this workshop I took from Aroha Knits, so that's Frenchy, on how to sort of kickstart your design process in 5 days. Because this was the summer break for me and I work on academia timelines, I had a whole lot of time that I kind of finished the challenge in about 3 days. And the result of that challenge was my first pattern, which is the Namu cowl. And sort of the reception to my first two patterns, the Namu cowl and the Bochagi shawl, were really positive in a good way. And so that just really sparked this, desire in me to keep designing things that also were aesthetically pleasing to me, but also, honored and alluded to my Korean heritage, which is something I didn't really see represented a lot in the crafting community. And since then, it's been really nice getting messages from people who are, maybe Korean or of Korean descent or of East Asian descent who have talked about these representation issues and have never found an explicitly Korean design until they found my designs. And that's been really, really nice for me. So why am I podcasting and why should you watch my podcast? Well, I started podcasting because I wanted another way to sort of connect with the community. So for instance, Instagram, which is where I'm most active, is really nice for community engagement, but it doesn't really allow for long format video sharing of things that, I might find or things that I might have purchased that I'm really excited about, or even about my design process and in progress designs that I really want to share and talk at lengths about. I actually was thinking about doing a podcast for a very long time, even before I started becoming active in the community and even before Quiet Queers Craft Along. I did have an audio podcast. I only released one episode of it though. And I guess my interest in doing the audio podcast sort of petered out because I wasn't getting a whole lot of community engagement on it, which was to be expected because I had a much smaller following, but also because it was lacking that sort of visual element where I could actually sit down and share things in my life with you all. I also thought that doing a video podcast might be an additional way to get in touch with the community because in Bloomington, where I live, we don't have any local yarn stores anymore. We used to have two, but they both closed within a year of each other, about 2 years ago. And since then, we've had weekly knit nights with the people who used to go to the yarn stores. I have friends with whom I can share my knitting, but currently with COVID-19 and quarantining measures in place, we can't really meet up. And so I wanted to, show off my pretties to someone, even if it's just people on the internet. So yeah, that's what kind of drove me to start a podcast. I think another thing that I really wanted out of a podcast was to highlight some of the, the creative works behind makers of color. We've seen a big push towards that on Instagram. We're trying to support more makers of color who might be underrepresented or made a little more invisible by the Instagram algorithms. So I wanted a space where I could sort of showcase some of those talents and, people can go and support them. Having said all that, I think I'm going to sort of dive into the podcast content proper. So I guess I'll start with FOs. I really only have one finished object to share with you currently so just a little bit more background information about me. I'm a fairly monogamous knitter. I usually have one big knitting project on my needles. Maybe I'll have a pair of socks in the works. I don't currently have any socks in the works right now. And I have my big crochet blanket that's also a long-term work in progress. And usually I also only have one spinning project at a time, so I do think that my FOs are going to be a little few and far between. That being said, I do have a recent spinning project that I finished, and I'm going to try to see if this camcorder is really good at capturing close-up shots. It's not really focusing. So I think what I'll do is I might include an image of it somewhere over here in post. But this is some handspun I finished using some Polworth fiber, I believe, from a friend of mine, Sabrina, who is lunaknitsgood on Instagram. I did a 2-ply barber pulling with a worsted drafting method to get about 226 yards of light fingering weight yarn. I'm not entirely sure what I'll do with it yet. It might go in my bin of handspun yarns until I can decide what to do with it. Next up are my works in progresses. Again, as I mentioned, I'm fairly monogamous when it comes to my crafting. So currently I really only have one thing on the needles currently. Let me see if I can do this. So this is a cardigan design I'm currently working on. I don't know if you can see this, that's the front of it. And currently I just need to finish the neckband of it and wait for my buttons to arrive so I can attach them to the button band. I don't want to show too much of it because it is a design in progress, which is why I'm showing it to you backwards. This is the inside of the cardigan. But what I do really like is the way I've designed and constructed the sleeve. So if you look carefully, this is the sleeve, this is the right side of the sleeve. And it is knit in the round but reverse stockinette. And one thing I really like about this design is that there's actually no purling in the sleeve at all. If you're like me, purling is kind of a pain for my wrists, so I don't really like to purl for long stretches at a time. So I'm really pleased with how the sleeve design came out. I don't really want to say any more until, you know, I can get some really nice pictures and have my testing calls out, hopefully within a week or so. But yeah, keep an eye out for that pattern. My second work in progress is also a stash acquisition, actually, or a stash acquisition. It is a spinning project that I'm in the middle of. I finished, I finished 2 bobbins of this fiber, and I'm on my 3rd, and I'm planning on doing a 3-ply, but this is the in progress bobbin shot. Again, this camcorder isn't really focusing, so I will include a picture of it somewhere on the screen. And this fiber is from Llady Llama, and here's a picture, here's a shot of one of the braids that I haven't spun up yet. And this is my first project for the Quiet Queers Craft Along event. Llady Llama has some really nice bases. This is my 2nd order from her. And this is in her Legacy base, which is the Superwash Merino, and it's in the colorway Phosphorescence. Like I said, I'm probably planning on doing some kind of 3-ply with it. My partner has actually already claimed the finished yarn for himself, and he wants another cowl made out of it. He has quite a formidable cowl collection. So yeah, I don't know if I'm going to use an existing pattern or design something new for his cowl, but we shall see. I'm really enjoying the spin. Again, I'm gonna probably spin up the 3 bobbins and apply a little bit. Unfortunately, I have an antique spinning wheel. I mean, it's not really unfortunate. I love my spinning wheel a lot. She's very old and she has a lot of character, but the bobbins are very small capacity. It's almost a stretch to fit 3 ounces on these really small bobbins. So I do have to, you know, spin up singles, wind them off into balls, set them to the side, and reuse the bobbins. And because it's an antique wheel, I also only have 2 bobbins. Hopefully soon, though, I'll be receiving my electric eel wheel Nano 6 when the Kickstarter is finished, and maybe I can show off that e-wheel in some future episode, because they do have larger capacity bobbins. So moving on to stash acquisitions. I actually didn't think I would have a lot of things to show in this section, but I ended up getting some things in the mail that I wasn't exactly expecting. So first up is, pardon the crinkling, is the skein of Handspun from my friend Rose. Let me see if I can... I'll include a photo in the video. But Rose is also Transmutation Knits on Instagram. They're also a knitting designer. And they sent me this really lovely skein of Handspun using fiber from Stitch Together. The colorway is One Big Dark Room, and it's some superwash merino, about 18 wraps per inches, and about 390 yards. Again, I'm not really sure what to do with it yet, even though it's really gorgeous and I love it. I love the little bits of green that are going through the purple. And I think it'll look really good with some of my other Handspun that does incorporate some of these bluish, purplish, greenish tones to them. So until I can figure out a really lovely pattern to honor this really lovely skein of yarn, it's probably going to be joining the others in the Handspun bin. Next up on stash acquisitions is my Beatrix box from Little Skein in the Big Wool. So the Beatrix box, if you don't know, is let me think, it's a 4 times a year, so it's like every 3 month yarn and Little Notion subscription box from Little Skein and the Big Wool. I'm actually one of the designers for the subscription box. I believe my box is coming out in November, which I'm very excited about, and I can't wait for everyone to see the yarn and the pattern that I've been working on with Anne. But this is this month's subscription box. So first, there were a couple of little notions that were included in it. First, this one isn't really a notion, but it's a loose leaf tea blend. Let me see if I can get the little label on the camera. It won't focus. But I'm reading, where did the little sign go? Here we go, about this tea blend. And I'm reading from the little description card that came with the box. The aromatic heart of this tea comes from the soft strength of lavender and chamomile. Lemon verbena brightens the flavor and is balanced with a variety of holy basil known for helping to counteract stress. I could use some stress counteracting right now. Vibrant rose petals and delicate blue cornflowers are the final touch, adding visual harmony. So I'm really excited to try this tea. I'm definitely a hot beverage fan, even during the summer. And I'll try to include, a little video snippet of me making the tea later on. But that's part one of the Beatrix box. The other little notion that was included is this needle minder, which I love. And it's got this really fun, mushroom and fall foliage print on the fabric. So Beatrix Potter, in addition to being, an author of children's books and illustrators, was a mycologist. She studied mushrooms in a very scientific capacity, which was not common for women of her time period. And, I also really love mushrooms. I think they're a lot of fun. Some of them are good to eat. Some of them you can even dye with. Lichens and mushrooms can be a really lovely source of natural dyes if you, modify the pH and things like that. But I really love this needle minder set. I'll probably be using it with my sock whips. I just need a cast on it sock whip. The other two things that were in the Beatrix box were these 2 skeins of yarn. Both of them are merino sport weight. So it's about 8 yards per 100 grams. And I love the names of these colorways. So this sort of deep purplish grayish yarn is called Portobello, again after the mushroom. And this one, which is a little cooler toned, that's gray with little green specks across it, this is called Lichen Lover. And funnily enough, again, as soon as I opened the package, my partner claimed this yarn for his own. So I'll probably be making him some socks out of it, or something small that I can do with one skein. And that's it for all my finished objects, works in progresses, and stash acquisitions for this episode. Now I want to talk a little bit about the Quiet Cruise Craft Along. As I mentioned earlier, QQC is sort of my baby. I started it last year in response to, people who might not be able to make it to regular Pride, or people who had concerns about sort of the corporate rainbow washing of Pride. As we know, Pride in general has become more corporatized. A lot of large businesses are sort of getting in on the Pride action, labeling things with rainbows, and not really contributing to the queer community at large. So I created Quiet Cruise Craft Along to sort of address those issues and have it be a 2-month-long Pride from Your Home event that you can use to find other queer makers in the crafting community, and also support queer makers and designers by purchasing their creations. So this year, QQC is running from July 13th to September 13th, if memory serves me correctly. And if you join us over on the Instagram page, which is Quiet Queers Craft Along, just one word, we have giveaways twice a week from a lot of generous donors and sponsors of the event. So we have, like, I'm trying to space it out, so there's a digital prize one day of the week and a physical prize one day of the week, and that's generally, you know, a pattern or a skein of yarn or a project bag or something like that. So we have those bi-weekly giveaways, but also in addition to that, we have end of craft along prize packages, and those prize packages will be drawn from finished objects, which are entered by using the hashtag QQC2020FO. It's a little bit of a mouthful, but I promise you it was better than Quiet Queers Craft Along 2020 FO. So I have a whole bunch of prize donations in the bookshelf next to me that I'll probably go a little bit more in depth about in my next episode. And yes, works in progress are welcome. The only stipulation for being entered is that either the materials used in your project have to be from a queer maker, or the design that you chose or the pattern that you used is from a queer designer. So what that means is if you have yarn from a queer indie dyer, for example, you can use that yarn and use any pattern you want, and that will be entered for FO prizes. Conversely, if you have a knitting pattern, for example, from a queer knitwear designer, you can use any yarn to craft that project and it will be eligible to be entered for finished object drawings. So yeah, last year we had 11 prize packages because the number of prizes I received was really overwhelming in a good way. This year, I've decided to keep it at 10 to keep postage prices down and logistics a little simpler, but that's still, 10 prize packages full of yarn, of notions, digital downloads such as patterns, all of them from, queer makers or straight allies who are really on board with the cause. So yeah, if you haven't checked it out already, check out Quiet Queers Craft Along on Instagram. I'll post a link to it down below. And that just about wraps it up for this podcast episode. Moving forward, I think what I would like to do is try to incorporate some sort of maker highlight in the podcast proper. So again, as I mentioned in the intro, I want to highlight makers of color in my episodes, as well as also queer makers who maybe have smaller reaches than others. So if you have a suggestion on how to sort of streamline that process, please let me know. Alternatively, if you are a maker of color and would like to be featured in a maker highlight, send me an email at knitboop@gmail.com. Again, the link to that is in the description box down below. Yeah, and so this is my first podcast episode. I would really be interested to see what you think of this format. If you have any suggestions or things that you would like to see in future episodes, do let me know in the comments down below as well. And yeah, until the next episode, happy crafting!